Chapter 5-1, Escape from Washington. The first rays of morning sunlight crept over the rooftops as Tim stood in the garage, staring at everything they had managed to fit into the pickup. Camping gear. Food. Water. Fuel cans. Tools. Blankets. Every item had been chosen because it might mean the difference between life and death. Everything else they were leaving behind. The house behind him had been their home for nearly 15 years. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. Late-night barbecues with neighbors. School pictures hung on the hallway walls. Lily's height was still marked on the kitchen doorway. Timmy's first baseball trophy sat on a shelf in the living room. Tim found himself looking toward the open door leading into the house. For a brief moment, he considered going back inside. Just one last look. Helena gently touched his arm. "It's time." He nodded without speaking. Carl stood beside the garage door, listening to the neighborhood. "It doesn't sound right." Tim listened. No children. No lawnmowers. No birds. Only distant sirens. And somewhere far away, someone screaming. Tim climbed behind the wheel. Helena settled into the passenger seat while Carl climbed into the back beside Timmy. Lily hugged her stuffed bear against her chest. Odin jumped into the truck bed, settling between the supply bins with his ears perked high. Tim looked around the cab. "Everybody ready?" No one answered. They simply nodded. Carl wrapped his hand around the garage door release. "Once this opens, there's no coming back." Tim swallowed hard. "Open it." The garage door rattled upward. Morning light poured inside. For one long second, nothing happened. Then a low, guttural moan drifted across the street. A man wandered into view from between two parked cars. His clothes were stained with blood. One arm hung at an unnatural angle. His pale eyes locked onto the movement inside the garage. Another figure appeared from a neighboring yard. Then another. The sound of the garage door had drawn them. Tim turned the key. The engine cranked. Once. Twice. "Come on." The infected began crossing the street. The starter groaned again. Helena gripped the dashboard. "Please." The engine finally roared to life. "Go." Tim slammed the truck into reverse. The pickup shot backward down the driveway. One infected reached the tailgate just as Tim shifted into drive. The truck lunged forward. A heavy thud echoed beneath the frame. Tim felt the body roll underneath before disappearing behind them. Nobody looked back. The neighborhood had transformed overnight. Smoke drifted from several houses. A garage burned fiercely 2 blocks away, flames licking into the morning sky. Cars sat abandoned in the middle of intersections. Front doors stood open. Broken windows glittered across the pavement. People ran through front yards carrying backpacks, suitcases, and crying children. Others simply stood frozen, unable to understand what they were seeing. A woman pounded on a neighbor's front door. "Please. Open the door. Please." Nobody answered. Tim kept driving. The farther they traveled, the worse the destruction became. A city bus blocked one lane after colliding with several parked cars. A delivery truck rested against a power pole that leaned dangerously over the road. Storefront windows had been smashed. Shopping carts overflowed with hastily gathered supplies. Above them, the thunder of helicopter blades echoed across the city. A military medical helicopter flew low overhead, banking toward downtown Spokane. Everyone inside the truck watched it disappear beyond a column of black smoke. "Maybe they're helping people." Helena's voice sounded more hopeful than convinced. "Maybe." Tim wished he believed it. Several blocks later, flashing amber lights appeared ahead. A county road maintenance truck sat sideways across the street, its front axle buried in a ditch. Concrete barriers and orange barricades blocked nearly the entire roadway. Only a narrow gap remained between the truck and the curb. Tim slowed. "I don't know if we'll fit." Carl leaned forward. "You will. Just don't stop." Tim eased the pickup toward the opening. The passenger side mirror missed the concrete barrier by less than an inch. The tires slipped into loose gravel before climbing back onto the pavement. Everyone released the breath they had been holding. Then Lily pointed through the windshield. "Daddy." A woman staggered into the road ahead. She waved both arms frantically. "Please. Stop. Please." She stumbled toward the truck. "My little boy. He's trapped. Please help him." Tim instinctively eased toward the brake. Movement caught his eye. Behind the woman, 6 infected emerged from between abandoned vehicles. They were following her. Helena saw them too. "Tim. Don't." The woman reached the middle of the road. "Please. Please don't leave us." Tim tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Every instinct told him to stop. Every instinct as a husband and father told him not to. The pickup rolled past. In the mirror, he watched the woman disappear beneath the growing crowd of infected. Her screams faded behind them. Silence filled the truck. Finally Carl spoke quietly. "You saved the people sitting in this truck." Tim never answered. The highway signs finally appeared overhead. Interstate 90 East. Coeur d'Alene. Relief swept through the cab. It vanished almost immediately. The interstate ahead wasn't moving. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of vehicles stretched across every lane. Brake lights filled the horizon. People stood outside their cars. Some argued. Some cried. Others simply stared ahead, trapped in an evacuation that had ground to a complete stop. Tim slowly lifted his foot from the accelerator. Getting out of Spokane wasn't going to be easy. Chapter 5 Status, in progress. Completed. 5-1 Escape from Washington. Next. 5-2 Navigate abandoned highways and massive traffic jams. Abandoned highways and massive traffic jams. Tim eased the truck to the end of the Interstate 90 entrance ramp and stopped. The interstate was frozen. 4 lanes of traffic stretched east as far as he could see, every vehicle bumper to bumper. Cars, pickups, motorhomes, moving trucks, and semis sat motionless beneath the growing morning sun. Nobody was going anywhere. People stood outside their vehicles talking in nervous clusters. Some paced between lanes while others argued with complete strangers. Parents tried to comfort frightened children sitting on blankets beside the road. A few people stared silently towards Spokane, watching thick columns of black smoke climb into the sky. Tim rested both hands on the steering wheel. This wasn't traffic. It was an evacuation that had run out of road. Helena unfolded the highway map. "There has to be another way around." Carl leaned forward. "First thing we need to know is why everyone's stopped." Tim nodded. "Could be an accident. Could be a roadblock. Could be worse." He slowly pulled onto the shoulder, passing the endless line of stranded vehicles. Several drivers honked at him. One man stepped into the shoulder, waving both arms. "Hey! Get back in line. We're all waiting." Tim rolled past without answering. There wasn't a line anymore. There was a parking lot. The farther they drove, the more abandoned the interstate became. Suitcases lay scattered across the pavement. A child's bicycle rested beside an open minivan. Someone had left camping chairs beside a motorhome as though they had accepted they might be stuck for hours. Lily watched quietly through the window. "Why are people getting out?" Nobody answered. Tim wasn't sure anyone inside the truck wanted to. A loud crack echoed across the interstate. Then another. Gunshots. Every head turned toward the front of the traffic jam. More shots followed. A woman screamed. People near the front suddenly began running. Not walking. Running. Some sprinted back toward their cars while others climbed over guardrails into the grassy median. A man carrying a toddler shoved through the crowd. Move. Move. They're coming. The panic spread almost instantly. Drivers dove into their vehicles. Doors slammed. Engines roared. Car horns erupted in every direction as people tried forcing their way into spaces that didn't exist. Metal crunched against metal. Someone rear-ended the vehicle ahead of them. Another driver jumped the median, becoming hopelessly stuck in the soft dirt. Tim stood on the brake, watching. Movement caught his eye nearly a quarter mile ahead. Figures wandered between the rows of trapped vehicles. At first there were only a few. Then dozens. Then so many he couldn't count them. The infected flowed onto the interstate from both sides, weaving between abandoned cars like water finding cracks in stone. People trapped near the front had nowhere left to run. Carl's voice remained steady. Back us out. Now. Tim shifted into reverse. The truck rolled carefully backward along the shoulder until he spotted a narrow maintenance access road descending the embankment. Hold on. The pickup bounced violently as it left the pavement. Loose gravel sprayed behind them while the suspension groaned over deep ruts. For one terrifying second, the truck leaned sharply to one side. Then all four tires found solid ground. They followed the maintenance road beneath the interstate before emerging onto an old county road running parallel to the highway. From below they could still see the chaos unfolding above. People climbed over guardrails. Some abandoned everything they owned. Others desperately tried pushing stalled cars out of the way. The infected kept coming. They weren't running. They didn't need to. The trapped motorists had nowhere to escape. Gunfire echoed across the valley. Then came the horns. Hundreds of them. Some drivers leaned on their steering wheels in panic. Others had already fallen across them. The continuous blaring rolled across the countryside like an air raid siren. Carl looked back toward the interstate. That's going to call every one of those things for miles. Tim pressed harder on the accelerator. Then we'd better be somewhere else before they answer. The county road wound through rolling farmland. Golden wheat fields stretched across gentle hills while old red barns stood weathered beneath the summer sky. The peaceful landscape felt impossible after what they had just witnessed. Helena studied the map. If we stay on these back roads, we should be able to reconnect farther east. Hopefully ahead of the traffic. Tim glanced at the fuel gauge. The needle had dropped again. Just under a quarter tank. He frowned. The detour had cost more fuel than he'd hoped. They would need to find gas soon. Very soon. The truck continued east, leaving the smoke of Spokane behind. None of them spoke. The silence inside the cab wasn't peaceful. Each of them knew the same thing. The roads ahead might be clear. But the world they had known was gone. The county road carried them farther east through rolling farmland. For nearly an hour, they saw almost no one. The occasional abandoned vehicle sat on the shoulder with its doors hanging open. A tractor idled in the middle of a field where its driver had apparently disappeared. Smoke rose from distant farmhouses, but whether from fireplaces or fires, no one could tell. The quiet was unnerving. Tim almost preferred the sounds of the city. At least there, danger announced itself. Out here. Anything could be waiting around the next bend. Helena folded the highway map. There's a small service station a few miles ahead. If it's still standing, maybe we can find fuel. Tim glanced at the gauge. The needle rested just above empty. We don't have much choice. The road curved around a stand of pine trees before opening into a tiny crossroads community. Calling it a town was generous. There was a gas station, a feed store, a mechanic's garage, and half a dozen houses spread along the road. The gas station's power was out. The pumps were dark. 3 vehicles sat scattered around the parking lot. A pickup, an SUV pulling a small camper, a faded station wagon. No one appeared to be moving. Tim slowed. Carl studied the buildings. Something's wrong. Tim nodded. Nobody leaves vehicles like that unless they have to. Odin stood in the truck bed. His ears pointed forward. His nose worked the wind. But he didn't bark. That worried Tim more than if he had. As they rolled closer, movement appeared beside the garage. Not infected. People. 4 of them. 2 men. A woman. A teenage boy. All carried firearms. One stepped into the road and raised a hand. Stop. Tim eased off the accelerator but didn't stop. The man rested a rifle against his shoulder. I said stop. Carl quietly leaned forward. Keep rolling. Slow. Don't make sudden moves. The pickup crept closer. The armed man's expression hardened. Roads closed. Fuel's ours. Turn around. Tim looked beyond him. The gas station's underground tanks. Several red fuel cans. Boxes of canned food stacked near the entrance. These people weren't passing through. They had claimed the place. Another armed man emerged from behind the pumps carrying a shotgun. The teenage boy nervously pointed a hunting rifle toward the truck. Helena whispered. Please don't let this happen. Tim lowered his window only a few inches. We're just looking for fuel. We've got kids. We'll trade. The first man laughed without humor. Trade? There isn't any trading anymore. Everything here belongs to us. Keep driving. Tim slowly nodded. All right. No trouble. He shifted into reverse. The truck backed away a few yards. The armed group watched every movement. No one lowered their weapons. Tim turned the wheel, preparing to leave. A loud engine roared behind them. Everyone turned. An old sedan came racing down the county road from the west. It skidded into the parking lot. A young couple jumped out before the car had fully stopped. Please. The woman cried. Our daughter's hurt. We just need medicine. The armed group didn't move. The rifleman stepped forward. Leave. Please. She's bleeding. We don't have anything left. The shotgun answered first. One blast into the dirt at their feet. The couple stumbled backward. Get out. Now. The young father raised both hands. We're not trying to fight. Another gunshot echoed. This one passed over his head. The couple scrambled back into their sedan. Moments later they disappeared down the road, tires throwing gravel behind them. Silence settled over the crossroads. Tim stared through the windshield. He had expected desperate people. He hadn't expected this. Carl spoke quietly. They're scared. Scared people do stupid things. Tim kept watching the armed group. The teenage boy lowered his rifle first. His face looked pale. He couldn't have been much older than Timmy. One of the older men barked an order. Watch the road. The boy immediately obeyed. Tim shifted into drive. Nobody inside the truck spoke as they pulled away. Only after the crossroads disappeared behind them did Helena finally break the silence. That could have been us. Tim nodded. It still could be. He looked at the nearly empty fuel gauge. They had passed up their best chance to refuel. Not because the fuel wasn't there. Because surviving was worth more than gasoline. Carl stared out the side window. The infected aren't the only thing we have to fear anymore. No one argued. The road stretched east through the wheat fields. For now, it was empty. But the family understood something they hadn't before. The world wasn't dividing into the living and the dead. It was dividing into those willing to help. And those willing to do anything to survive. The county road wound through miles of open farmland. Golden wheat swayed gently beneath the summer breeze, giving the countryside an almost peaceful appearance. If Tim ignored the smoke rising behind them, he could almost pretend the world hadn't ended. Almost. The fuel gauge hovered just above empty. Tim found himself checking it every few minutes. Helena followed their progress on the map. There's another road ahead that should take us closer to the state line. If it's open, we'll save several miles. Tim nodded. Every mile mattered now. The road climbed a low ridge before curving back toward Interstate 90. From the hilltop they could see the freeway stretching across the valley. Traffic still filled every lane. Only now. Almost none of the vehicles were moving. Tim slowed. Something wasn't right. There were far fewer people standing outside their cars than before. Carl leaned forward. Pull over. Tim guided the truck onto the shoulder overlooking the interstate. The family climbed out. Even Odin stood quietly beside the truck, ears raised toward the highway. For several long seconds. No one spoke. The wind carried faint echoes from below. Car horns. Distant gunfire. Screams. Then they saw them. Hundreds of infected wandered between the abandoned vehicles. Some stumbled aimlessly across the lanes. Others clawed at locked car doors. Many surrounded vehicles where frightened survivors were still trapped inside. A man swung a tire iron through a cracked driver's window, trying to fend off an infected reaching into his truck. A woman climbed onto the roof of her SUV while desperately waving a jacket. Help. Please. Over here. No one came. Farther down the interstate, several people sprinted across the grassy median toward the surrounding fields. Some escaped. Others didn't. The infected didn't move quickly. They didn't need to. Every stalled vehicle became another trap. Every frightened driver became another meal waiting to happen. Lily buried her face against Helena's side. Please. Can we help them? Tim's jaw tightened. If we go down there, we'll never get back out. The words tasted bitter. He hated saying them. But he knew they were true. A rifle cracked somewhere below. Then another. The sharp reports echoed across the valley. Dozens of infected turned toward the sound. Within seconds, they began shambling in that direction. Carl watched silently. Noise. That's what they're following. Tim nodded. Every shot. Every horn. Every scream. It's pulling more of them together. A deep rumble interrupted the silence. Everyone turned. A fuel tanker, left unattended on the interstate, slowly rolled backward down a slight incline. Its driver must have abandoned it earlier. Now gravity had taken over. The massive truck gathered speed. It slammed into a line of stopped vehicles. Metal exploded across the highway. A chain reaction rippled through half a dozen cars before the tanker finally came to rest against the concrete barrier. The crash echoed for miles. Every infected within sight turned toward the wreck. And then, more began emerging from the nearby tree line. Tim felt his stomach sink. They just keep coming. Helena folded the map. We need to leave. Now. As the family climbed back into the truck, Odin suddenly barked. Once. Twice. Tim looked in the rearview mirror. Movement. Several infected had wandered onto the county road behind them. Not many. Half a dozen at most. But they had heard the tanker crash as well. Carl checked both directions. They're spreading. Tim started the engine. The truck rolled forward. A mile later, another group appeared crossing the road ahead. Then another. The infected weren't chasing the truck. They were all drifting toward the interstate, drawn by the growing chorus of noise echoing from the trapped traffic. The family carefully weaved around them, never stopping long enough to become a target. Eventually the road curved away from the freeway once more. The sounds faded. The fields became quiet again. Only then did Tim allow himself to breathe. He glanced once more at the fuel gauge. The needle had dropped even lower. They had escaped the highway. But they couldn't outrun an empty fuel tank. Soon. They would have to risk stopping. And next time. Luck might not be enough. By early afternoon, the interstate had disappeared behind a series of wooded hills. The constant sound of distant horns and gunfire faded until only the truck's engine remained. Tim kept the windows cracked. Fresh air drifted through the cab, carrying the scent of pine trees, dry grass, and freshly cut hay. For the first time since leaving Spokane, the world sounded almost normal. Almost. The county road narrowed to two cracked lanes that wound through farmland and patches of dense forest. Old fence lines divided sprawling wheat fields. Weathered barns leaned with age. Rusted mailboxes marked long gravel driveways disappearing into the trees. Most of the homes looked abandoned. Some had front doors standing open. Others had vehicles still parked in the driveways as though their owners had simply vanished. Tim slowed each time they approached another farmhouse. Carl scanned every building through the passenger window. Keep moving. If we don't need something, don't stop. Tim agreed. Every building meant unknown people. Unknown people meant unknown risks. Helena traced another route across the map. There's a small town about 15 miles south. If we stay north, we should avoid it. That's the plan. Tim turned onto an even smaller road. The pavement quickly gave way to cracked asphalt patched with gravel. Tall grass crowded the shoulders. Tree branches reached over the roadway, forming a green tunnel that shaded the truck from the afternoon sun. It felt secluded. Hidden. Exactly what Tim wanted. Lily finally broke the silence. Do you think Grandma's okay? Helena looked out the window before answering. I hope so. She's tough. You know your grandma. Lily smiled faintly. She always beat Grandpa at cards. Carl chuckled quietly. That's because she cheated. Helena laughed for the first time in what felt like days. She absolutely did. Grandpa knew it too. The brief laughter filled the truck with something none of them had felt since the campground. Normal. Even Tim smiled. It didn't last long. As they rounded another bend, a pickup truck appeared in the middle of the road. Its driver's door stood open. No one was inside. Tim slowed to a crawl. Carl rested a hand on the tire iron between his feet. Easy. The pickup had been abandoned hastily. A toolbox lay overturned beside it. Several wrenches and sockets were scattered across the pavement. A wallet rested near the driver's door. No blood. No bodies. No signs of a struggle. Just gone. Tim carefully steered around it. Odin stood in the truck bed, watching the trees as they passed. His ears twitched constantly. Tim trusted the dog's instincts more than his own. If Odin wasn't relaxed, neither was he. The road climbed into a heavily wooded ridge. Towering pines blocked most of the sunlight, casting long shadows across the pavement. The temperature dropped noticeably beneath the forest canopy. Helena looked at the fuel gauge. How much longer? Tim frowned. Maybe 30 miles. Maybe less. Carl sighed. We're going to have to stop soon. I know. Nobody liked the idea. Stopping meant becoming vulnerable. But an empty fuel tank would leave them stranded. As they emerged from the forest, the land opened into broad rolling hills once more. Far in the distance, the blue outline of the Idaho mountains stretched across the horizon. Tim pointed through the windshield. There. Lily leaned forward. Is that Idaho? Not yet. But we're getting close. For the first time all day, hope replaced fear inside the truck. It wasn't much. Just a distant mountain range beneath a clear summer sky. But it was proof they were leaving the worst behind. Or at least, they hoped they were. Tim pressed gently on the accelerator. The truck continued east along the forgotten back roads, avoiding towns, avoiding highways, and avoiding anyone they didn't have to meet. The farther they traveled from Spokane, the quieter the countryside became. It should have felt comforting. Instead, the silence made Tim wonder just how many people were left alive to make noise. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Somewhere ahead was Helena's mother's farm. Somewhere ahead was the chance to start over. They just had to reach it. The fuel warning light flickered to life. Tim stared at the small amber glow on the dashboard. No one said anything. They all knew what it meant. He eased off the accelerator, trying to conserve what little fuel remained, but there was only so much he could do. The truck still weighed nearly 3 tons with their family and supplies. It needed gasoline. Soon. Helena studied the folded highway map one more time. There's nothing marked for miles. No towns. No service stations. Just farms. Carl pointed through the windshield. Then let's hope farmers keep fuel. The road crested another hill. Nestled in a shallow valley below sat a white farmhouse surrounded by fields of tall wheat. A weathered red barn stood beside several grain silos. An old windmill turned lazily in the afternoon breeze. Beyond it sat a green tractor and an aging diesel pickup parked near a machine shed. Tim slowed. The property looked peaceful. Too peaceful. No smoke drifted from the chimney. No livestock wandered the fields. No movement anywhere. Carl watched through the windshield. Let's check it. Quickly. If someone's here, we'll know soon enough. Tim turned down the long gravel driveway. The tires crunched loudly beneath the truck. Every sound seemed to echo across the empty fields. He parked beside the barn instead of directly in front of the house. Less visible from the road. The engine shut off. Silence settled over the farm. Tim looked at Helena. Doors stay locked. If anything happens? Drive. She nodded. Come back to the truck. No heroics. Carl grabbed the tire iron. Tim slipped the camp hatchet through his belt. Odin jumped from the truck bed before Tim could stop him. The German shepherd sniffed the air before slowly circling the yard. His tail remained low. But he wasn't growling. That's a good sign. Tim hoped. The front porch creaked beneath their boots. Tim knocked firmly. Hello? Anybody home? Only silence answered. He waited another moment before trying the door. It opened. The house smelled stale. Breakfast dishes still sat on the kitchen table. A half-finished cup of coffee rested beside an open newspaper. A pair of reading glasses lay folded nearby. It looked as though someone had simply stepped outside and never returned. Carl quietly searched the downstairs while Tim checked each room. Bedrooms. Bathroom. Living room. No bodies. No blood. No signs of violence. Just absence. Tim opened the pantry. His eyes widened. Shelves lined with canned vegetables. Soup. Beans. Peaches. Boxes of pasta. Flour. Rice. Enough food to keep a family alive for months. Carl appeared in the doorway. Jackpot. Tim nodded. Only take what we need. Leave the rest. Carl looked surprised. Why? Because someone might still come back. Carl studied him for a long moment before giving a small nod. Fair enough. The two men carried several boxes back to the truck. Helena carefully organized everything in the bed while Timmy helped stack the cans beneath a tarp. Lily handed supplies to her brother one at a time. Nobody spoke louder than necessary. When they finished loading the food, Carl pointed toward the machine shed. Let's see about fuel. The shed doors slid open with a loud scrape. Inside sat decades of farming equipment. Air compressors. Welder tanks. Shelves of spare parts. Oil drums. Along one wall stood several yellow fuel containers. Tim picked one up. Diesel. Another. Diesel. The old tractor. The farm truck. Of course. His shoulders slumped. The pickup ran on gasoline. Carl continued searching. Over here. In the corner, beneath a dusty workbench, sat 4 red plastic gas cans. Tim unscrewed the first cap. Empty. The second. Empty. The third. He smiled. Gasoline. The fourth held nearly as much. Together they added almost 8 gallons. Relief washed over him. That should get us to Idaho. Maybe farther. As Tim poured the gasoline into the truck, Odin suddenly stopped. The dog lifted his head toward the tree line beyond the barn. Every muscle in his body stiffened. Carl noticed immediately. What's he got? Tim followed the dog's gaze. At first. Nothing. Then movement. An elderly man slowly emerged from between the trees. His faded overalls were stained with dried blood. One boot dragged awkwardly behind him. His gray hair hung across a face twisted by decay. Another figure appeared beside him. A woman wearing a faded floral dress. Then a third. A teenage boy. They wandered silently toward the farmhouse. Carl tightened his grip on the tire iron. Farm family. Tim nodded grimly. Probably. The infected hadn't noticed them yet. They drifted aimlessly across the field, drawn only by instinct. Tim looked at the nearly full fuel tank. The food. His family waiting in the truck. We have what we came for. Carl understood immediately. Let's leave. Everyone climbed back into the pickup. Tim started the engine. The infected slowly turned toward the sound. By the time they reached the driveway, the 3 figures had crossed only half the field. Tim looked once in the mirror. They had probably lived their entire lives on that farm. Now. They wandered it forever. He turned his eyes back to the road. There was nothing he could do for them anymore. The truck rolled east, carrying his family one step closer to Idaho. The sun hung low over the rolling hills as Tim searched for a place to stop. They had crossed into Idaho less than an hour earlier. A small green highway sign marked the state line, but no one had celebrated. Crossing an invisible border hadn't changed the world. The smoke still stained the western horizon. The roads were still eerily empty. And the future remained uncertain. Still. It was one more milestone. One more step away from Spokane. Tim turned onto an old Forest Service road that disappeared beneath towering pine trees. The gravel lane wound through the woods for nearly a mile before opening into a small clearing beside a narrow creek. The water sparkled in the fading sunlight. Large boulders surrounded the clearing, shielding it from the road. Carl slowly nodded. Good spot. Only one way in. One way out. Tim parked beneath the trees where the truck couldn't easily be seen from above. The engine fell silent. For a few moments, no one moved. Everyone simply sat there. They had survived another day. Helena finally broke the silence. Let's make camp before it gets dark. The routine almost felt familiar. Tim and Carl pitched the tents while Timmy unloaded sleeping bags and lanterns. Helena heated canned soup over the camp stove using water from one of their jugs. Lily gathered small sticks for the fire while Odin trotted around the clearing, sniffing every tree and bush before finally lying near the edge of camp where he could watch the woods. As darkness settled over the forest, a small campfire crackled softly between the tents. Nobody wanted it large enough to be seen from far away. Just enough to warm dinner. Just enough to remind them they were still human. The family ate quietly. No one complained about the simple meal. Warm food tasted better than any feast after the day they had endured. When everyone had finished eating, Lily rested her head against Helena's shoulder. Mom. When are we going home? The question lingered in the cool evening air. Helena looked toward Tim. He stared into the fire for a long time before answering. I don't know. Lily frowned. But home is waiting for us. Tim wished it were that simple. Maybe. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. She looked confused. I don't understand. Carl poked at the fire with a stick. Sometimes. Home isn't a house. It's the people sitting around the fire with you. Lily looked around the circle. Then smiled faintly. So we're still home? Carl smiled back. I'd say so. Tim looked toward the dark trees surrounding the clearing. I keep thinking about the house. Everything we left behind. Helena reached for his hand. I know. The family photos. Your workshop. The kids' rooms. It wasn't just a house. It was our life. Tim nodded slowly. I keep wondering if we left too soon. Carl answered before anyone else could. No. Tim looked at him. Carl's weathered face reflected the dancing firelight. If we'd stayed, we'd be trapped like everyone else. Or worse. Tim didn't argue. Deep down, he knew Carl was right. Timmy stared into the flames. Do you think any of my friends made it? The adults exchanged uneasy glances. Helena finally spoke. I hope they did. I hope a lot of people did. Maybe they're somewhere safe tonight. Just like us. No one mentioned that many probably weren't. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with memories. Birthday parties. School concerts. Family vacations. Ordinary moments that already felt like they belonged to another lifetime. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance. Odin immediately lifted his head, ears pointed toward the sound. Another howl answered from farther away. Carl listened for a moment before relaxing. Coyotes. Nothing to worry about. Still. Tim added another log to the fire. Old habits were hard to break. When the fire had burned down to glowing coals, everyone prepared for bed. Tim walked one final circle around the campsite. The woods remained quiet. The creek flowed gently over smooth stones. Above the treetops, countless stars filled the clear Idaho sky. It was beautiful. And somehow, that made everything feel even sadder. He climbed into the tent beside Helena. She squeezed his hand in the darkness. We'll get through this. Together. Tim listened to the gentle sounds of his family settling into their sleeping bags. Outside, Odin curled up near the entrance of the campsite, keeping silent watch. Tomorrow they would continue toward Helena's mother's farm. Tomorrow would bring new dangers. But tonight, for the first time since the outbreak began, they were safe enough to sleep.